Hi team, this is Mrs. Bassett. This is some of our introductory information that we're going to talk about. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do notes. And if we already got through some of this, that's okay. You can fast forward it. I also have a really cool video. So this is very basic information in chapter 1 that I promise I will bring back over and over and over again. It's kind of like that fight you had with your boyfriend like 6 months ago. You keep bringing it back over and over again. Well, guess what? That's what I'm going to do. Okay, so here we go. We're going to start with, I'm going to put you on the dot cam. Our textbook is anatomy and physiology. So understanding both of them, knowing the definitions of those, knowing what processes a living thing does, how do we know something's alive, what does it need to stay alive, and some of the mechanisms that our body does. That's what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to share my screen with you. And I'm going to stay right here in the corner. So how about I'll stay up here? Okay, so I'll try not to make goofy faces. Okay, so one of the first things we're going to work on here, and let's see, I kind of am going old school where I'm going to take notes, and I would normally do this on a whiteboard. So I'm going to put this chapter 1. Okay, that's kind of my newest thing this year, is I'm kind of summing things up like big ideas. Okay, so remember that our class is about anatomy and it's about physiology. Okay, and so anatomy is about the body parts. Okay, physiology is how they work. We would call that function. Now, when you think about the two, you really can't have one without the other, right? So if you're thinking about once we get, so I will tell you this, okay? Something to, I guess, as a side note, we might as well do this, right? Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it down here, actually. Okay, so let's think about it like this, the anatomy, so the parts. What kind of, go back and think about the parts that make up a human, and let's start with the smallest parts that make up a human. What do you think? Okay, what are the cell parts? Well, we would probably talk about cells, right? But go even smaller than cells. Let's talk about atoms and subatomic particles. And those subatomic particles make macromolecules, right? Molecules, macromolecules, carbohydrates, things like that. And those in turn make up those organelles, right? That are inside the cells, right? This is still all, friends, this is still all the anatomy, isn't it? Okay? And in turn, those cells make up tissues. Those tissue make up organs. And those organs make up organ systems. Okay, now you might be like, seriously, why did we all start with that? Well, let me tell you this. There is, okay, here's the chemistry part. So when you think about what is chemistry, that's the chemistry part. You're a giant walking chemistry experiment. So we're going to spend some time reviewing that a little bit, but I don't go back over chemistry because I know you had chemistry. The organelles and cells, we of course learned about in biology, but we're going to go back to that because those cells when you stop and think about and break down an organ, it's kind of hard to talk about an organ system without going back and talking about the cells that are made up, because there are several cells that make up a single organ system. Okay, so from here to here, okay, is kind of one section. This is its own chapter that we talk about, tissues, because that's very important. Multiple tissues make up organs. And then of course our first organ system, the organs that we talk about, or organ system we talk about, is the skin and bones and all that stuff, the muscles. And when you stop and think about it, it's great to learn all the muscles, right? But if you don't know how the muscles work, okay, that's going to be kind of hard. And in fact, you know, physical therapists are fantastic. They know all the anatomy, but they also know how everything works. They also know where everything is attached, like where your bicep is attached to your shoulder and then down on your radius and ulna. It's super important to understand how they work. I always say, I certainly hope that my surgeon knows what the body part is and what's not working with it before they remove it, okay? So this is how we really organize our class. Okay, this is the way our class is going to work. So we're going to start out, of course, with this introductory part, and then we're going to go through the different systems. Okay, and part of your first assignment there is going to be kind of interesting, looking at some of the practices that we used in medieval times to combat certain illnesses. And when you stop and think, you know, some of it actually made a lot of sense. Okay, are you ready? Okay, so let's do the characteristics of life. Living things do these items. And we can sum them all up with the word metabolism. Have you heard that? Like someone has great metabolism. Well, that's really talking about breaking things down, the efficiency of all of these different characteristics. Okay, so characteristics of life. Here we go. Number one, and I'm going to go through this, and I might add things to it if I need to explain. So I'm going to do one of the easiest ones first. Movement. That doesn't necessarily need muscle. So when I'm thinking about movement of organisms, it could be moving things across a membrane, for example. Okay, besides muscles, absolutely. Number two, responsiveness. Okay, now if you remember Grimm from biology, one of the R's was responsiveness. So this is reacting. So which organ system does the reacting in your body? Well, hopefully you said the nervous system, okay? So reacting, got to be able to react to survive. How about growth? Okay, got to be able to, we're growing in size. And this is, of course, limited by cell size. If you remember from biology, there was an experiment with agar cubes. You can only get so big before the cell needs to divide, because if you don't, then the cell can't get things in and out of it properly. All right, reproduction. Now, with reproduction, keep in mind that reproduction, we can talk about cellular reproduction, okay? And that's called mitosis. Okay, you've got to be able to repair, okay? Not having babies necessarily, but you've got to be able to repair things in your cells. Respiration, that doesn't mean you need lungs. Respiration, in this case, I always like to put cellular respiration, breaking down glucose, right? And breaking down glucose to get that energy that's needed by the cells. Of course, in the powerhouse of the cell. Number 6, digestion. You got to be able to break down molecules. Okay. I'm going to put particles because just breaking down any of those things is really, digestion can be digestion of chemicals as well, toxic chemicals. Okay. Absorption. It doesn't do a whole lot of good to break things down if you can't absorb or take in items. And that could be through, you could even say absorption, that could be even osmosis, for example, going through the membrane. Number 8, circulation. You got to have movement, internal movement of products. So movement, but circulation, internal movement, circulation of water could be one. Number 9, excretion. Got to be able to release waste products. Keep in mind that waste products doesn't necessarily mean urine and fecal material, but could also mean carbon dioxide. And the last one I like to leave is probably the one that you know the least amount. It's called assimilation. And it is combining products into something new. Okay, so stop and think for a sec. So I eat a bunch of carbohydrates. I don't burn all of those off. Those extra calories are stored as fat. But wait a minute, didn't I just eat noodles? Noodles are not fat. Noodles are carbohydrates. Right. So the carbohydrates are put together, and when we get to the organics, carbohydrates and fats all have carbons and hydrogens and oxygens and all of those things already. So you can just take those and rearrange them again, and then you'll get something totally different. Okay, the bonding is different. Okay, so characteristics of life. So this is a living thing. How do you know something is a living thing? So in your textbook, they talk about vital signs. So how do you know something? So let's pretend, you know, someone's in the class. You need to make sure they're alive. What are some of the things you're going to check on that person? Well, hopefully you said, let's check to make sure they're breathing. Okay. That's what we would normally do if we were going to perform CPR or something. Please check and see if they're breathing. Maybe, and I'm talking, this can be done without equipment, right? Could we check their heart rate? Sure. Heart rate, pulse, right? See if they have a pulse. Here on the hand, up here by the neck. You can even see if they're breathing just to see if their chest is rising, all of those things. What else? Now, the rest of these, you kind of need some equipment for. So if you had some equipment, what might you use? Well, one of my favorite ones you could always check temperature, right? Making sure their body temperature is appropriate. When children get sick, sometimes they get real lethargic. I remember when Brooklyn was 7 months old, she was running a high fever, and she just kind of whimpered. She didn't crawl, she just kind of laid on the floor on her little mat that she had, and it just really was scary because she became very lethargic. Kids are a great indication. Their behavior is a great indication of how they feel. Okay, us adults, we kind of tough it out, but kids, it's really bad. They usually, you can tell when they're sick. How about blood pressure? If you had a blood pressure cuff, you certainly could take someone's blood pressure. Older people sometimes have really extremely low blood pressure, so circulation is an issue. Do you ever have that thing put on the end of your finger? That's O2 saturation. You should, of course, be in the 90s, the high 90s. Always looking at that when you have an asthma attack, if you're having trouble circulating the oxygen. And one of my favorite ones that they like to check, of course, the reflexes. Now, if you had a flashlight, you could certainly do the pupil reflex. You could do a pain reflex on the foot if you wanted, but you could check and see if it was a reflex. This would also be able to tell you if there was some sort of drugs involved, if their pupils are dilated, that would be able to tell you maybe what kind of drug, or if their pupils are super pinpoint, kind of what kind of stimulant or depressant that they might be on. Okay, now with all these vital signs, how about I actually spell this? ING, maintaining life. Let's focus on maintaining life, okay? So what does somebody need to maintain life that we just talked about here? Well, one of the first things you probably think about is food, okay? But more important than that, you gotta have water. You can live longer without food, but you can't live without water. Okay, have you ever heard by the time you're thirsty, you're dehydrated? You don't want to get dehydrated. Food can also be a source of moisture, but you definitely need, your body will start to use its reserves, but you can't go without water. The water is super important. Number 3, okay, if you ever have a chance, so several of you are juniors, if you read Unbroken, fascinating about Zamperini and how they were living in the lifeboat, of course, in the middle of the ocean, which has plenty of water, right? But it's salt water, and making sure that they're trying to drink the rainwater and not the salt water, and what the delirium happens. It was just fascinating. So I also read that book. What a great testament about the food and water. The other thing would be oxygen. You've got to have oxygen. You have to have oxygen, not necessarily to breathe itself, okay? You can breathe in other gases. I wouldn't suggest it, but the oxygen is needed for cellular respiration. That's where you break down, of course, in the powerhouse of the cell, the mitochondria, you get energy. Oxygen is definitely needed. If you're not taking in the oxygen and it passing through the lungs, then we're not getting that to the rest of the body. Then we have a problem, okay? So we have to be able to do that. Number 4, you've got to maintain body temperature. 98.6 is normal. Not everybody is normal, okay? But we want to make sure we don't want it to be too hot, because things don't work when it's too hot, and things don't work when it's too cold. And the last one, probably the weirdest one, is pressure. When I put that down, atmospheric pressure, we've got to be able to maintain pressure. And by pressure with breathing, in our case, you could also talk about blood pressure. You have a closed circulatory system, so if you spring a leak, you definitely will have all of your liquid blood leak out, but your lungs. So if you just take, for example, take a deep breath in, and if you blow out, keep blowing, and you blow it until you can't blow anymore, you still have air in your lungs. Okay, have you ever heard of a collapsed lung? You still have air in your lungs no matter what to keep them inflated. They're like giant balloons, okay? So those are definitely still, and they need to be, okay? All right, the last thing we're going to talk about is homeostasis, okay? How do we maintain this? Okay, so we've talked about maintenance of life. We talked about characteristic of life. We've talked about all those things. How do we maintain, what does our body have to maintain like normal, the balance? So think about it like a scale, okay? Homeostasis. So this is keeping stable internal environment. Okay, and you kind of have two roads that the body uses to keep that, and we call it a negative feedback loop and a positive feedback loop. Okay, so this is how I describe positive versus negative. Okay, in a negative feedback loop, you immediately do the opposite to bring you back to normal. The positive feedback loop, you're positive, you're like, way to go. Okay, what it is it it's positive, but it makes it worse. Okay, it's not the opposite. Okay, it exasperates the problem. It's going to get worse before it gets better, if you've ever heard that before. So of course I will give you lots of examples. So let's talk about this. Here's one of the first ones. Your temperature. It gets too high. Okay, you're so hot. Okay, you're running. What is your body doing? You run and then you start to sweat. Sweet with sweat. That's always a hard one for me to spell. And you sweat, your body cools back down. So your body does something to immediately bring your body temperature down. All right, your body temperature is too low. Oh, what are you doing? Oh, that's right, you shiver. Well, shivering is a way of generating heat to bring your body temperature back up. Have you ever been so cold that you can't control your shivering? Kind of weird, right? Okay, so those are all negative feedback loops that you immediately have something to take over. Okay, doing the opposite reaction. So right away, doing something, not making the temperature worse. Okay, it's automatically, we're sweating, opening up those pores to get that temperature back down. Okay, another example is in the handout that I have attached here, and it's on blood glucose levels. So let me show you this, and I have some highlighted areas. So we've got some really important, this might look really complicated, but this is one of my favorites. So here's the start, so I'll explain this. So this is a high blood glucose level. So this is really explaining, so diabetes versus hypoglycemia, okay, in this. So too much sugar is in the blood, okay? High blood glucose level, okay? The pancreas looks like a piece of wadded up chewing gum, okay? The pancreas is located in your body. If you go right in the center and you were to think about picking up your stomach, okay? Picking up your stomach, then it'd be right underneath your body or your stomach, okay? So wadded up chewing gum. The pancreas, which we know about the pancreas, produces insulin. And insulin is really a hormone, okay? Insulin is really the hormone that says, hey, body cells, could you take up some glucose? Okay? And the body cells go, oh yeah, sure we can. Okay? And also, it's going to take until the liver, hey, the liver, by the way, okay, in your body. So notice that I'm opposite you. So this would be on the right side of your body, large organ right up under your rib cage, okay? You can look this up too in your textbook. Let me show you. Right after chapter 1 is a whole bunch, look at, of organs. Okay, so see, here's your liver. Okay, so here's the stomach. All right, stomach. So we took part of the liver out here. So there's the gallbladder, there's the pesky gallbladder. So here's your liver, takes up all of this space, okay? Here's your stomach, there's the pancreas. See, I told you, pick up your stomach, there's the pancreas, okay? And the pancreas and the liver both dump accessory juices into the small intestine, okay? So see, this is in your textbook. In fact, there it is. There's the pancreas, see? It's way in the back. It's nice and protected. Okay, so not only do the body cells take up more glucose, but the liver, okay, your liver will take up some of that glucose and store it as glycogen. Whoa, wait a minute. I'm going to put here assimilation. Remember how we talked about things changing? So we're going to take glucose and we're going to store it up. It's like, hey, you bought too much sugar. Go put it in the pantry. I don't know about you, but I'm a big baker. I love to bake. So I put stuff in the pantry all the time. And with all that glucose being taken up, guess what? Your blood glucose level comes down. So those that do not make enough insulin or do not make it efficiently, this is why you would have to take insulin so that the blood glucose levels don't continue to rise. Now, there are some people that their blood glucose level gets too low, okay? So this is the other scenario. Notice we're not making things worse before it gets better. We're taking care of things right away. So if you don't have enough sugar, okay, you're really hitting a low, okay? Now, most of us, we can feel if our blood glucose level might be low. We haven't eaten in a while and we start to get this really nasty headache. We go and eat something. Some people have that issue all the time, okay, where their blood glucose level's too low. Now, who's got extra glucose in the form of glycogen? Well, the liver does, but it needs to have a hormone tell it to release it. Well, that's back to the pancreas again, has another hormone. This one is called glucagon. Glucagon gets released. And remember, a hormone is something that makes middle schoolers go crazy. No, it's a cell that acts upon another cell. It has a target. So the hormone goes to the liver and says, hey, liver, could you go to the pantry and release some of that sugar? And the liver goes, sure, I can. And it releases some of that glucose into the cells. Blood glucose level starts to rise. Of course, those are going to those cells that need it so badly, and we're back to a normal blood glucose level. Ironically, my husband, this is one of the things that they get called out on a lot, is about sugar levels. And again, maintaining, if you are a diabetic or you have hypoglycemia, I had a student who had to drink cornstarch all the time, or a lot of times they have to have snacks on a regular basis. Here with the insulin, you really have to watch the things that you're putting in your body. What is full of stored sugar, what's long lasting, and really, quite honestly, friends, I mean, shouldn't all of us be thinking about that? You know, really, when you think about for breakfast, you know, what's one of the best things for breakfast, right? A Pop-Tart. Those things are terrible. I mean, come on now, full of sugar, they're not going to last. You think about long lasting energy. So something with protein, wake up and have an egg in the morning, anything would be helpful. Another example of this also would be pH levels in the body. Your pH levels, acidic versus basic, though in different parts of the body might vary, but your blood pH levels do not vary very much. They vary between like 7.35 on the pH scale to 7.45, not very much. And so there's lots of buffers that are in your bloodstream or in the body that keep it from swaying one way or the other, because bad things happen. Okay, positive feedback. Gets worse before it gets better. So let's talk, I'm going to talk about temperature again. But in this case, I'm going to talk about when you run a fever. So one of the things about running a fever, you get hot, right? And then what happens? But you feel cold, right? So you cover up with a blanket and you don't sweat. Okay, and you're like, oh, I'm so cold, but yet you're like 102 fever. Okay, and really, I mean, quite honestly, and this is going to sound bad. So unless your fever is really super high, where you get 103 and it lasts for more than a day, probably should get a hold of somebody. But for my children, because we have allergies and stuff, if they're running a fever like 100, 101, I'll let them run the fever if there's no symptoms. For example, Brooklyn, when she runs a fever, she tends to get a headache, a really bad headache. And so I'll give her some Tylenol or Motrin to bring it down so her head doesn't hurt so much. But even, for example, even kids teething, little kids will run a fever sometimes. It's really weird. Bryson, on the other hand, can run a fever and you'll never tell. Okay, the kid just does not stop. He's so active. So a lot of times he'll run a fever. I won't give him anything because a fever is good. A fever is, we're going to crank up this temperature so that we're going to kill off whatever's in the body, whether it be a cold virus, or bacteria infection, like a sinus infection, whatever it is. That's really important. Again, don't get me wrong. If it gets too high, you need to go in because things can get a little scary. If it gets way too high, you can have seizures and things like that. But that's the body's way. So it's going to get worse before it gets better. The body shuts down all of your sweat glands, no sweat. Okay, have you ever had it where you've been sick and all of a sudden in the middle of the night you wake up and you're like drenched in your own sweat? It's disgusting, isn't it? But we say the fever broke. That's the body's way of cooling you down afterwards. Then we switch over to here. But while you're running a fever, the body's trying to get everything. It's like a pressure cooker. We're trying to cook whatever's in the body, get rid of it. Okay. Another one is blood clotting. Again, I know this seems really weird, but here's another example. This is from a different textbook. So why is this a positive? So if you look down here at the bottom, it says this feedback mechanism enhances or exaggerates the original stimulus, so the activity is accelerated. This feedback mechanism is said to be positive because the change that occurs proceeds in the same direction as the initial disturbance, causing the variable to deviate further and further from the original value or range. Okay, so in this case, you have cut yourself, okay? Clotting occurs as the platelets adhere. So platelets are the little fragments, okay, to the site, and they release chemicals. So it's kind of like, used to be back in, I know this is going to date me, back in Kmart, they used to have something called a blue light special. So you'd be shopping. Imagine if you were to do it in Walmart, you'd be in Walmart and all of a sudden it'd come across the loudspeaker that there was a blue light special in aisle 13 on macaroni, okay? And so literally what they used to do is drive this little cart over with a blue light on the top that would flash in the store, and everybody that was in the store would run over to whatever the sale was because it was an awesome sale, and then it'd be over. It'd be over in like 15 minutes. So it'd be like Black Friday, but for an instant on a certain day. You never knew what was going to happen. It was kind of exciting. That's exactly what's happening here. It's like a loudspeaker going, hey, we got a cut. We got a cut right here. Somebody come and help. So the chemicals are calling for more reinforcements to help plug the hole that you made because you cut yourself. And more released chemicals attract more platelets. So more platelets come. So see, Black Friday sales, right? After Thanksgiving sales, until the cut is completely filled with platelets and the bleeding stops. Okay. Now, if it was a big enough cut, that might need some more assistance, but that's the whole idea between blood clotting. Okay. And my last favorite one, labor. Okay, now I'm not showing you pictures. I'm not going to show you a video. I don't have either one, but I want to tell you this. So when you think about, and I'm sure you've all watched it on television, so a lady gives birth, okay, you start getting the contractions, right? Okay, and the contractions are caused by the uterus. Okay, so the uterus is giant muscle in the lady, okay, that's housing the baby, and it starts to contract like this. It's a muscle, okay, and it starts to contract because it's trying to take that baby and squeeze it out through the vagina and out of the body. And so those contractions start small, okay, and they're just like, oh, you know, that's owie, and then they get more frequent, and then they get stronger and stronger and stronger as it's working that child down through the birth canal. And it really is I mean, technically the first child, of course, being that you haven't had another child, you know, it takes a while. A lot of times women are in labor for hours, hours and hours. I was in labor probably 10 hours with Brooklyn. I don't know. It kind of, it's all a blur a little bit because I didn't, I was contracting, but the baby comes down. So you'll hear, for example, the mom is dilated 6 centimeter or whatever. It really is talking about as the baby moves down, things start to stretch. According to allowing that baby to come out of the birth canal. So those contractions get worse and worse and worse, and you want them to get worse because you want that baby to come out. A lot of times you might hear that contraction start and then they stop, and then the mom has to be induced, if you've ever heard that. So induced is not fun. I was induced with both children. That's where a chemical called Pitocin is given, and it causes you to have contractions, and they are super intense. It was a lot. I did have epidurals, which of course we'll talk about when we get to the nervous system. It's where they put in medicine to numb me, and you can still have contractions, but I didn't feel them until it was time that the baby, and you still will have contractions, though you can't feel them, and then the baby moves down, and then they can turn down your epidural so that you can push, because that final push, you need help doing that. So that gets worse before it gets better, those contractions. That's a good thing. Once that baby comes out, I'm sure you've heard of like the afterbirth and stuff, but once the baby comes out, it's kind of a relief, and the placenta comes out and you don't even realize, because the placenta is nowhere close to being as big as your baby is. And then that's it. Then the uterus actually contracts back down and you're good to go. I mean, it'll come down in a couple days and stuff. Okay, that was it for our first lecture. So got all my good stories in there. I want to finish up. I'm going to stop sharing right now, and I'm going to go to one of my favorite videos, the Amoeba Sisters. So I'm going to do this and share this with you. Hold on, I'm going to see if I can make my sound a little bit, and I'll start it. I'll start it over again. Okay. Don't you love it when a video actually says everything that we just learned? All right, that's one of my favorites. So hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time. See you later.